Hey, all right. Welcome back to Raff's Brain, a show about things that are interesting to me. I'm your host, Rob Raff. It is time for another episode of Riffin with Raff. Yes, Riffin with Raff is the stream of content on the Raff's Brain podcast where I sit down to catch up and connect with people I like and I respect and adore and admire. And I'm no better guest on the show than my friend David Gliem, who is coming to us today outside of Asheville, North Carolina, site of Warren Wilson College. Warren Wilson is an extraordinary institution where David is the special assistant to the president as well as a faculty member, professor of art history. We're going to talk about his life and times and journey. And then we have a very exciting aspect of this show, which will only work probably for the YouTube channel. So if you're listening to this on the podcast, I hope this will encourage you to jump over to the YouTube episode, and we'll show some of the artwork that he has in his personal collection that he's going to share with us today. So it's very exciting. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're welcome.
We go way back. My wife, Colleen, is friends with David's wife. They were early friends from 3 years old.
Yeah.
So they've been going, for a long time. So when I started dating Colleen, I met David. And I think first visited you in Penn State, I think
so. It's, 25 years?
It's been a while.
About?
I remember we went on a walk and you took some photographs. We still have one of those photographs up. You developed and sent it to us. I don't remember this or not.
We were still developing film?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
We weren't all glued to our smartphones or any of that stuff back then. And then you were gracious and attended our wedding and drove us. I think you drove us home from our.
We had a great time in Pittsburgh.
From our second reception.
We had a great time. It was, I think, the best wedding we've ever attended.
And then since then, David and Valerie moved down to Florida for a number of years. We got to visit them there. So what prompted this was last time I was visiting you, you broke out and shared with me some of these items that we're going to discuss here in a moment. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to make sure that since we're here in Asheville. Or outside of Asheville, I wanted to make sure we, share this with my audience, my tens of loyal fans and listeners. It's so cool. Okay, so first thing, let's back up a second, because I'm really curious about your path, your discipline. You're an art historian.
Yes.
And when people say, when people introduce themselves, like, and that's what do you do? I'm an art historian. I'm triggered by anybody's description of what they do. In terms of like, how did this happen? Like, what point in your life did you decide this is going to be a thing that I pursue professionally? That's probably a long story. Let's start. Think about young David Gliem. Were you always were you curious about art, or did you just like?
I was. I had. I grew up with old family friends of my parents. Their two sons were into the arts. One was a dean of the School of Music at Ithaca for a while.
Ooh.
And then his younger brother Greg was an artist. He went to Pratt, and so we spent a lot of holidays with them.
Wow.
And I was always sort of involved, around the arts, whether it was music or the visual arts.
Were you yourself ever creative and artistic and expressing it in some way?
A little bit, because my mom, when I was growing up, I don't know if your mom did this too, but she did like ceramic lessons. Wow. And she was always into crafts.
Crafty, a little bit of craftiness.
Yeah. And so my mom would involve me in helping her put together sort of craft things, presents for family and friends. So
right.
I did a little bit of that, but I wouldn't say I was an artist by any means.
And you're going to school in the 80s, and it's like, grade school, elementary school, then high school. Did you have a good art teacher who kind of really saw this, hey, furthered your interest, or was it more like college that you got deeper exposure to the
it wasn't really until college.
Okay.
I had a professor, I went to Juniata College in central Pennsylvania.
What was their mascot? Do you remember?
We were initially the Indians.
Oh, that's been changed.
That's been changed. Now we're the Eagles.
Go Eagles.
Go Eagles.
All right. I wanted to give a shout out to Juniata. All right.
So I had a terrific mentor and professor there. Her name is Karen Roselle.
Thank you, Karen. Professor.
She's now retired.
Okay.
But as you know, when you go to college, you have to take general education requirements.
Yeah.
And I had to take 2 courses in the arts. And there were very little options there. You could do music,
Yeah.
you could do visual arts like painting and drawing,
Yeah.
or this new thing I had never heard of before, which is art history.
Wow.
And so I was more bookish than creative.
Got it.
So I jumped in an intro class. It was okay. I wasn't like, it was fun, it was interesting, I wasn't blown away.
Yeah.
But I did the course,
Yeah.
and then I needed another class. And so I jumped in a 19th century course,
Okay.
and I was blown away. And I was hooked,
Okay.
and that was like sophomore year, and I thought, I'm moving on. I'm going to drop my pre-med.
Wow, you were pre-med?
I was pre-med.
Oh my God. Imagine you as like a surgeon. It's almost comical.
It is. I'm sitting with these hands, right? I'm steady.
It's good, man. It's fun. Isn't this is a testament to the importance of teachers in our lives? It is absolutely a case that anything I've done or pursued was triggered by a class and exciting, a great communicator. It makes me wonder if I had taken a professor in a different discipline that really connected, would I have just latched on and gone a different path? You just never know, right? So this is cool. You had an inspiration, a force, but you only had 2 classes. Then you got to major in it. So you got to go a little further. Was there an art history major at Juniata or no?
No. So I kept up with like the STEM requirements. I followed that through, but then I picked up art history as kind of a minor.
Yeah.
And I made sure I had enough courses and credits that I would qualify to get into graduate programs.
So you started thinking, I'm going to do this. I'm going to pursue this as maybe like the academia could be a path.
Yeah, I loved the life of professor. Those 2 cousins that I mentioned.
Yeah.
The older cousin Carl, he went on to be a professor at Ithaca.
Wow.
Then he went on other places, and so he became a mentor because he's 10 years older than me. He was a mentor. I really loved his lifestyle, living the life of the mind, being in the college environment around young people, being a professor, being a teacher.
Yeah.
So I thought, I can. And Karen, of course, was a big
influence.
She had they had a terrific life. She was married to another faculty member. So I was like, yeah, I love this. I love this ethos. I love this way of life. So I'm going to pursue it.
And then where did you end up? Did you have to hone in a certain school for a certain type of art history? I mean, I'm just wondering what that world looks like out there.
Well, I loved Indiana Jones movies.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, right.
So, and I was really interested in archaeology and Egyptology.
Yeah.
And sort of old stuff, Greek stuff. And so I looked around, and actually Penn State, which is right up basically over the mountain from Juniata.
Wow.
I connected with a faculty member there as an Egyptologist. Mm-hmm. Her name is Elizabeth Walters.
Egyptology.
There's
a Tutankhamun exhibit at the Biltmore. We didn't go to that, but it's like, wow, it's out there. Okay, sorry.
So I connected with Professor Walters, and she convinced me to apply to Penn State for my master's degree. Okay. And so I went.
Now wait a second. When you're getting a master's, what would you do with a master's in art history? Were you thinking maybe? Well, you said academia. Almost like, I don't know what the world is like out there, but PhD seems to be like the calling. That's like the credential that you need for a professor.
And at that time, it was. You still had a lot of schools that offered a master's terminal degree, and they're still out there. Yeah. I like the idea of a terminal master's because what if I got into this? Yeah. And I decided I didn't want to do a PhD. I wanted to be able to walk away with some credential.
Got it.
Right.
Okay.
So I did finish the master's, but not in Egyptology or anything. When I got there, of course, there were other faculty. Right. And so I really connected with Professor Georges Mauner. Oh, wow. Who was a 19th century specialist. And he was mind-blowing. I mean, he is an old school scholar. I mean, he spoke 7 languages. Holy moly. Was a concert pianist. He just had this depth of knowledge about culture. Wow. That I don't think really exists in academia much anymore. He was just so inspiring. So I gave up the old stuff
Now, when you do that, did I can't remember her name, Carol, maybe it was something, not something else. The woman who was so into the Egyptology, that you were
Professor
there.
Walters.
Yes.
Yeah. I did take classes with her, and they were great classes.
And then, but you're like, I'm not going to go down this path. I'm going to go down this other guy's path. That they weren't upset or anything.
Well, no. Well, remember back as my undergrad.
That's right.
Days, I took that second class.
Yeah.
It was in 19th century.
Oh, so it all comes full circle.
And George was a 19th century specialist.
Okay, this makes
so
sense.
I took a class with him on Manet. I took classes with him on, oh my gosh, what else did we do? We did Gauguin.
Wow.
Picasso. I was just hooked.
Okay.
And he just sort of brought me into his orbit. And I did my master's thesis with him.
Yeah.
On Edward Manet. And then I did my PhD with him. And I worked on.
So you stuck around. You're like, I'm going all the way. So
Exactly.
Your Penn State PhD, and then you're like, I got to get a job. I got to get. Didn't you stick around? You worked at Penn State for a while, did you not? Am I crazy?
No. I was. One thing great about being a graduate student at Penn State at that time, I don't know if things have changed, was that they gave you experience in the classroom.
Nice.
So if you proved yourself, they would give you your own classes. You just wouldn't be a TA grading papers, although you tended to start out that way.
Right.
But after I think it was a couple of semesters.
Yeah.
The head of the department tapped me to teach my own course. It was like an intro level class.
Yeah.
And it just that's how it all started.
Do you like teaching? Do you feel like that's a fun pursuit, or is it more like annoying versus like the actual intellectual, maybe research, or maybe you like both? I don't know.
I loved it all.
Yeah.
And I'm someone who is always looking for a next challenge.
Yeah.
And I've done the professor thing.
Yeah.
For 25 years.
Yeah.
I went up through the ranks, and then I began to be more interested in thinking about making a broader impact in higher education.
Okay. The administration.
So I moved more into administration. When I was at Eckerd, I was a chair of the arts area, and then when the new president came on. I did strategic planning with him, and then I moved into an associate VP role in strategy.
Yeah.
And then at that level, we're working with the president and the board, the cabinet, you can really shape an institution in ways that you can't really do as a faculty member.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what I've been doing since.
Very cool. All right. So we're here at your home, and one of the cool features at Warren Wilson College is they have kind of this faculty housing arrangement. We're here nestled in the woods. There was a giant deer that just walked through the driveway on the way back here. It's a pretty nice setting. The cicadas are out. You can probably hear them humming. Or no, that might also be the dryer.
Yeah, you hear the desk and dryer going. And what's really exciting is when the black bears come up on the porch.
He told me about this. That's a little over the top for me. Okay, so what you've graciously offered to do here is show us a little bit. This is what's neat to me. Like, it's almost unbelievable. You have a collection of original prints. It's very extensive. We're only going to scratch the surface here. And again, this is where the audio listeners might want to jump over to my YouTube channel to check out this episode, because I'm going to take the camera up, and David has graciously agreed to kind of walk me. I'm very pedestrian and ignorant of what we're about to discuss. So this has to be very elementary.
Okay, no worries. Yeah.
But walk me through these things one at a time. I think you have a couple piles of different prints, like why you gravitated toward those and these artists or these particular styles, and you can even kind of just like explain some of the elements to us in ways that would be accessible to a layman. So I'm going to grab the camera up here, and I'll just like... How do I flip it around? Come on, Rafferty, don't blow it. I think I have to... There we go, that'll work.
Is that how you want to do it?
I think I can flip the camera around. Just a second, folks. Hang tight. So here we are. We have like... how many prints? Let's talk about your whole collection first, real quick.
Well, when I was working with Georges Mauner, George had an extensive collection of art that he had amassed over years and years, going particularly because he spent a lot of time in France.
Okay.
And he told me, look, you don't have to spend a lot of money to own original work. And sort of the best way to get into collecting is by buying original prints. And he had this beautiful collection of original prints, 18th, 19th century, largely French artists, including major French poster makers like Toulouse-Lautrec and artists I did my
Those are
dissertation
big
on.
names. Like, those are household names.
Well, when George was buying prints, I think back in the 60s, you could buy a Toulouse-Lautrec poster for very little money. Nowadays, they're...
I got you.
So they aren't a good investment.
You just gotta know, you know, even if it's just like an interesting idea that really it's more accessible than you think.
It is. And if you connect with people who know a little bit or do a little bit of research and reading, it's not hard to become kind of knowledgeable enough to, you know, jump into the game, the print collecting game. So I started collecting Japanese prints, in part because I love Japanese culture. When I wrote my dissertation on Pierre Bonnard and the influence of Japanese culture on his art, and Bonnard is a French painter, printmaker. He was involved in a whole range of things. He actually made folding screens in the Japanese style.
Wow.
But he lived from like 1867 to 1947, so that's his trajectory. So I was fascinated by the influence of Japanese culture on particularly late 19th century artists like Pierre Bonnard. Of course, the artists like the Impressionists were also big lovers of Japanese art.
What we don't have to talk about here, but is interesting to me as an observer and listening to what you're saying, the changes in technology, in transportation, and the exchange and speed at which information was able to be shared is pretty radical in that time. We had the trains and steamboats and all that stuff. It's like the idea that Impressionists in Europe are able to access Asian prints or like to get to like mix those influences, kind of neat.
It is. Well, the Great Age, certainly the Great Age of Exploration,
that does it too, obviously.
16th, 17th century, right?
Yeah.
But Japan was an unknown culture until the 1850s. They remained isolated.
Wow.
And they rejected any kind of trade agreements with European countries.
Wow.
The only country they had any sort of real ties with were the Dutch and the Spanish. But then in the 19th century, the Americans went over.
Okay.
Basically forced their borders open.
Okay.
And then the Japanese realized that they weren't a real military power. They weren't going to be sort of competitive against the American or any other European nation. So they acquiesced. But they began to create this sort of very vigorous trade with countries in Europe. And that's when Western artists really began to see Japanese art, and it blew their minds.
Yeah.
I mean, it really did. Because it was unlike anything they had seen before.
Okay, let's take a look at some of this. All right.
So what I'm going to show you here, just so Japanese prints, they're called ukiyo-e. So it means images of the floating world, scenes from everyday life, and these things were basically collectibles in the major cities in Japan. Edo, Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka had a print production sort of culture.
Okay.
And what the Japanese wanted to buy, at least initially, were images of their favorite kabuki actors. And kabuki was a big entertainment in the pleasure districts, in the big cities. And so artists developed a market for images of their favorite kabuki actors.
Oh, cool.
This is a very, very early, so these kinds of Japanese prints, this really got started the early 17th century through the 18th century and the height of it is really in the 19th century. So this is an early work. This is actually a kabuki actor print by an artist named Toyokuni Utagawa. He lived from like 1769 to 1825, so this is a very early print. This dates to about 1805, 1807.
Hello, dogs.
This would have been one of two prints that would have been next to each other called a diptych.
Do you have the second one or no?
I don't have the second one.
Your collection is incomplete.
It is incomplete. They were flat, kind of two-dimensional. And that was something that a lot of Western artists didn't really see, because the West was really caught up in, representing nature in sort of three-dimensional ways. So this is a very early actor print.
Cool.
This is by an artist who was related to Toyokuni Utagawa. His name is Kunisada Utagawa. So it's a family of printmakers. Okay. His date's 1786 to 1865, and this print dates to 1852. So,
oh my gosh.
So here you can see.
What type of inks are these? I'm just kind of, it looks so colorful.
Well, up until Japan was opened up to the West, Japanese pigments were largely natural.
Wow.
So they were, taken from natural materials. But after the West began to use some more kind of synthetic inks.
Yeah.
And so you see some different colors. This, I think, has some synthetic color. This pink color is probably a synthetic dye, a synthetic ink.
I zoom in here, and you can the details is ridiculous.
It is.
The fineness of the hairs is just like, how do you even? Oh my gosh.
And these are made by using a process called woodcut. So each color has a separate block cut for it. It's like stamps.
Now, I'm sorry, I'm jumping in. Does someone own those? Those would be the real precious items, because you can print you can print numerous. Does anyone have the blocks that made these things? That would be an interesting thing to collect too, maybe.
People do collect them.
Wow.
I have not run across them.
They're a little harder to store, and they're more.
You can find them, and because wood blocks are made from wood, of course, planks of wood.
Yeah.
You can only get so many prints from them.
Interesting.
So unlike metal engravings or metal-based sort of prints, printmaking processes, you can create kind of hundreds of thousands of versions of those images before the plate breaks down.
Yeah.
But the wooden ones, because it's a soft material, they tend to.
So does the artist
disintegrate.
Carve the wood block, and then I'm just trying to imagine what the different skills you need to make something like this.
Printmaking in Japan was a workshop process. So Kunisada Utagawa had a workshop, and so he would make the designs.
Okay.
He would make sort of the initial design, and then he would employ younger apprentices who would cut the wood blocks. And then you would have others who were specialists in the printing, so they would ink the blocks and create the prints. And so it became kind of a production process.
And what's this is going to be, I'm sure, quite varied. Was there a typical run? Are these numbered in any way that we can delineate, or no?
No, they created as many as they possibly could.
Okay.
And sometimes prints were made even after the artist's death. This one was made just prior to this artist. This is 1852. He lived to 1865. So he was alive when this particular print was made. But some, if the wood blocks do survive, later publishers would purchase those blocks and then create new runs of them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool. What's the next one on this list here?
So this is another actor print, also by Kunisada Utagawa. This is a little bit earlier. This is about 30 years earlier. You'll see a difference in the colors.
Ooh, this is very vibrant. This is very bright.
But this because this is closer to the 18th century, and in the 18th century the prints had very limited use of color. It was usually blacks, like reds, yellows, and some like umber colors. But here in the 1830s you can see the addition of some blues. Mm-hmm. So quite a big jump from the 1820s, 1830s to 1852, and the brightness of his coloration.
Is that also a Kabuki actor as well?
This one is, this is a Kabuki. This is the Kabuki actor Bando Mitsugoro IV.
So this is even where it gets very interesting. The popularity of actors might drive the market demand for prints.
Exactly. So these artists were businessmen.
Right.
So they thought about the marketing, and they would compete with each other in terms of who could create the most interesting images of the best actors of the age. as a way to
Imagine
drive
that.
demand.
It's like,
Yeah.
it's like I don't want to diminish it, but it's like an early paparazzi sort of thing. It's like we got to get these images of the most popular, most commercially viable. Yeah, it's just interesting. I dig it. I really think it fascinating, and not something I ever knew much about.
So these are also actor prints, but they're in a different format.
Okay.
They're called these vertical or pillar prints.
Wow.
So the Japanese like these narrow formats because it introduced some complications to generate interesting compositions.
Whoa. Now, when you preserve these, I noticed that those are not laminated or don't have this plastic sheet. Is the preservation process different for these vertical narrow strips versus?
No, I mean they probably at some point you want to use an acid-free paper like this is, and I really should take them out of this plastic.
Okay.
It's not going to be harmful for them. You just have to make sure that you keep them out of any damp areas so that the moisture doesn't get inside that plastic sheet.
How many have you seen? Is it typically just two, or is there a whole? Could you imagine a whole series of these panels?
Yeah. Well, this is actually 2 of a series of 10.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. And this is an older one. A more recent one. This dates to 1910, 1920.
Wow.
So what's interesting is that the style of Japanese prints were greatly impacted by the influence of Western art, Western culture.
Okay.
So a lot of Japanese artists began creating images using some Western, particularly perspectival techniques, like one-point perspective.
Okay.
And by the early 20th century, there was kind of a backlash against this sort of Western incursion of Western culture in Japan. And so there was this movement called Shinhanga, where artists sort of returned to older traditions. And so this is actually, although this is the 1920s, this is from the 1920s, it uses sort of older styles. It sort of adopts older styles. So it's very similar, if you can think, to this one, right? Except for some of the colors.
And but the separation in time here is decades. I mean, this is
Almost a century.
a century. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
So you can look at the feet.
Yeah.
And you can see, and this kind of anatomical treatment comes out of actually the 18th century from a printmaking family called the Tory school, where they created these really contorted anatomies, these sort of bulbous looking feet, splayed toes.
Wow.
So this artist is looking back to this artist who's looking back to an 18th century president.
That's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. And I really love the narrow.
But you only have 2 out of the 10, David. I'm not impressed. I'm just kidding. Now, could you conceivably try to track down the other 10 in this collection? Do you have an image? Do you know what this whole thing looks like?
I haven't done that research, so I don't
Okay.
know yet. But I do keep an eye out for them because I do like this artist.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And as we're preparing, are we going to move into this next pile, or is still more here? Do you have more?
That's
We're
it.
good,
These are the actor prints that I have.
As we're moving to the next pile, I'm curious about. You just mentioned keep an eye out for these things. I'm going to be on the lookout. Where does one even, I mean, obviously the internet has brought us all together. Global, trade and information is like lightning speed. I don't think I'd find these on eBay, or maybe I would.
You would.
Really? Wow. Okay.
I would not go to eBay.
Okay.
But there are reputable auction houses out there that
Okay.
specialize in Asian art, Japanese prints.
Okay.
And I've been buying them largely from this auction house out of Germany. The ones I own. This is by a really famous, and your audience may be familiar with this artist's name is Ando Hiroshige.
Oh yeah.
So
I've heard the name. I don't know much about it. But.
Well, along with Okusai, who did the Great Wave print.
Oh, I know that. Everyone knows the Great Wave. I mean, most of us do.
So Hiroshige and Okusai were the 2 most famous printmakers, 19th century printmakers.
Okay.
And Hiroshige was a specialist in landscape prints. So he did. This is, like I said, this is probably the best. This is the best print that I own by the best known maker.
What's going on here? Looks like someone's getting tortured or something.
No.
Or is he just leading the way?
So Hiroshige, he became famous with this series of prints called the 53 Stations of the Tokaido Highway. So the Tokaido Highway was this basically simple sort of roadway that went between Edo and Kyoto.
Okay.
And there were sort of famous, natural scenes and sort of way stations, little towns that they would go through.
Okay.
And so he identified 53 spots along this highway to create different images based on that. So this is one from that series.
Very cool.
So you have travelers who are going along the Tokaido Highway and the Tokaido Road, and they're going between Kyoto and Edo. So he published this series of prints, and it became explosively popular.
Wow. What would so if a consumer, would these be popular for more Western consumers, or would locals want this and put it up in their house? I don't even know. How would these be displayed back in that time frame? Would they be up on the wall? Would they be, or they just be collected and put you do, put them in a box and bring them out?
Kind of, yeah. They probably wouldn't. They probably didn't display them in Japanese houses.
Right.
They probably, kind of like baseball cards. If you think about baseball cards,
I love this analogy.
Yeah. So these were cheap. I mean, literally so inexpensive, like a baseball card at the time.
Wow.
And they weren't considered overly precious in Japan. So when we talked about trade opening,
yes.
So when the Japanese were sending wares to sell in Europe and the United States, they would actually use these things as packing material. So they would crumble them up.
No.
Yeah, and sort of wrap what they thought were more precious things like lacquer things or ceramics or
that's tragic.
Or kimono or whatever they were selling.
It's almost like the comic book page. If you're really in a household that maybe remembers, we would wrap our sometimes gifts in newspaper or in comic pages, because. Packing, it's just they weren't thought of as super valuable.
No, this was art for the populace.
Okay.
This was art that was accessible to anybody really who wanted it. It was kind of some democratization of art. Just sort of cheap, popular prints of images that the people loved, things that they were familiar with, famous actors, famous scenes.
Is it abundant now, or was it really tough? I mean, obviously at the time it was abundant, but it sounds like a lot of these were just thrown away or disposed of, not thought of as valuable. At what point does people start going back into the collection mode of this, or does there a ebb and flow of that?
When there were pretty savvy collectors in the West, who opened shops for people to buy Japanese, Asian decorative arts.
Wow.
And the artists, because they didn't have money, they saw these things. They would take them basically out of the trash and,
iron them
out, and they hung them up in their studios.
Wow.
And one of the first Western artists who really tried to promote Japanese prints was Vincent van Gogh.
Really?
So he had a collection. He actually tried to make money by selling them with him and his brother. His brother was an art critic and gallerist. So they tried to make money. Van Gogh tried to make money from them, but he also used them as inspiration. So if you look at his paintings, you can see some of the influences of Japanese art.
Very cool.
Particularly the bright colors and things like that.
What's the next?
So this is a Hiroshige, and then I have a work by an artist who was trying to emulate Hiroshige because Hiroshige was,
legendary.
It was legendary at the time. So this is an artist by, his name is Sadanobu Hasegawa. He's contemporary with Hiroshige, but he didn't become quite nearly as famous. So this is kind of a print that he did, sort of a takeoff of Hiroshige style.
Very nice.
And this is a series that he did called 100 Views of the Provinces. And this dates to the late 50s. And the Hiroshige was from 1841, 1844.
Wow. Influence over 100 years later.
Yeah.
That's neat to see.
Well, no, they were...
10 years later.
10 years later. 10 years later. Yeah, 10 years later.
I was mixed up. My bad.
And you can see this is a much smaller format.
Amazing. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's small.
This strikes me as more like you reference baseball cards. Like I could see that as even easier to collect and store than
more portable.
More portable.
Yeah.
Fascinating, man.
So to get into this, I think you're talking maybe a couple $100 an image.
Wow.
To get into it. Of course, some of the more prized examples of the prints you can spend thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Like if you wanted a Oku-sized Great Wave,
Oh, forget it.
hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yeah, you're not gonna, those are generally inaccessible.
But you can buy a poster version of
You can
that
buy
for
a
$5
poster
at
But there are-
Spencer's Gifts or whatever. But there's lots of stuff.
There's so much out there, and you don't need to spend a lot of money. And these, this is original work. I mean, a lot of it was, these prints were made under the direction of the artists who designed them. So and they're beautiful. I mean,
They are beautiful. They're very neat. I'm wondering only because they are so beautiful, and art is a collection versus a display for sharing with the world. That sort of balance. Because if they were out, even if they were framed and they'd be exposed to sunlight, they'd be, So it's like, how do you balance that?
There are different sort of philosophies about this.
Yeah.
Those like this auction house, for instance, they think about this as a commodity. You hold it as an investment that you want to later then sell for more money.
Right.
And they don't recommend that you display them. I have every intention of eventually getting these framed and displaying them.
I feel like we need to have a traveling exhibit or something. This is amazing. With audio updates, we could come up with this. We could even digitize these. The last time I saw David was at the peak of the NFT craze, and I thought these would make great NFTs, digitized collectibles. Oh my gosh! So I have all the sorts of intentions here. I'm sorry. I know that NFTs aren't real in a sense, that they've cratered a lot, but there are different versions of this that could be used as a springboard to get people interested in the artists and the time periods and the history. So I'm particularly a fan of broadening the exposure, or even trying to tell stories about each of these. Man, it could be a lot of fun. Do we have any records of I'm trying to think about it because it depends on the era of the artist. Do we have any records of like audio, voice over, or interview footage or files? Video or audio? Be very old if it was video. I don't even remember when video cameras came out. Probably not in time to capture this. But what I'm getting at is if you digitize versions of these images, you could have an accompanying like authentic voice.
Oh, I see what you mean.
I don't know. Are these guys?
No, I mean there are. I mean, some of the early sort of film archives we have of artists.
Yes.
You're talking late 19th century, early 20th century.
Okay, yeah, so it's not.
I mean, and of course they're silent. Audio wasn't.
I keep forgetting how recent an advent this is.
But you can find videos of like Degas walking down Paris, and
we don't have audio. We don't know what they sounded like. We don't have like a Lincoln. We don't have. We have pictures of Lincoln. We don't have his voice recorded.
Right.
So it's just unfortunate. We'll never have that. We could do voiceover actors. We could come up with
there
something.
There may be recordings like of Monet because he lived till like 1926.
Yeah.
But these artists, except for that one 2-pillar prints,
I
think that artist is even dead. But I've never seen any sort of video or photographic representations of photography. Some of these artists died right around the advent of photography. I mean, we were talking photography was 1920s-ish.
Yeah.
Really wasn't, widely accessible probably to the 40s or 50s.
One last question before we wrap up here.
Yeah.
Are there any contemporary artists who have been inspired and maybe are deploying these very techniques, the blocking, wood blocking, printmaking?
Oh yeah.
In a way that pays homage to them?
Oh, definitely. There's a few famous artists influenced by the Japanese print movement who are creating images in the style of. Some of them are like Western artists who actually like live in Japan, so they're living and working in Japan, and they're producing stuff. So, it still has a tremendous impact. It's still influential. Artists are still inspired by Japanese art. Still inspired, like doing woodcuts and using these traditional techniques despite all this sort of digital stuff. They still like the handmade, hand wrought. You know, the sort of the process of making work is still very much alive.
Well, that's all for today, folks. Thank you so much, David Gliem.
Oh, you're welcome, Rob.
What an extraordinary introduction to this world. I'm going to have to take some time here and absorb even more. But we'll have you on the show again every couple of years.
There you go.
We're going to get
back to
Nashville.
Nashville.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. See you next time on Raff's Brain. If you like this episode, share it with a friend. We got to get into the scores of listeners. We're at tens of listeners now. Scores and then hundreds, and then we're taking over. All right. Have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.